Now we're going to take down the hold down nut for the turntable here. I've got the short leg wrench positioned, and I'll just give that a little loosening. Breaks free nicely. Now I've got the set screw loose, so I can just remove this by hand. And underneath we have no brass washer, 2 wavy spring washers, and a bottom brass washer. So now I can just lift it off, but there you are. There's the groove in the pinion, and it's engaging the edge of that 3-disc stack. And so right now, if we just pull it up, we have we'll be causing potential harm to those discs. So before we pull the fork up, I am going to remove the right ascension knob from the pinion. And that just pops right off, revealing the shaft and some kind of nice greenish colored glue. I'm sorry, grease. And so now that pinion, after I give it a little bit of a wipe, that's going to slide right down through the bushing. It's another one of these eccentric bushings. And so now this pinion will push down in, remaining engaged to the edge. This is yes, it pushes down in, and it's engaged to the discs, and we can just slide this whole thing up with a little bit of stubbornness. Right now it's giving a little tension. There we are, and it even just falls out. So let's look underneath the fork here. I'm being protective of that plastic indicator window for the right ascension. This is in place here, and we have this adjustable spring. There's a little hole that you can access when your scope is assembled, and right now this is set at minimum engagement and minimum tension, so you can tension this up if you need more friction in your drive. And so one of the things I was thinking about doing is loosening that tension even to the point that it goes pop, and that screw comes out of the L bracket. That would allow this whole pinion to swing around as we did on the arm, but I'm comfortable just having it pressure through as we did and remain engaged until the fork is clear. So now that lets us, I'm going to take this apart a couple of turns. I haven't counted, but if this is 80 threads per inch, it's an inch long, which means if you're reassembling this and you want to make sure you're at the middle and not about to bottom out or anything like that, then give it 40 turns and you'll be at the halfway point. Or if you're wanting to adjust it the other way and make it, you're never going to make it looser. You're always going to tighten it up is what it really comes down to. So take our Brownell screwdriver, remove the current bit, and we get these nice 1/4-inch drive nuts at the bottom of our fork arms. And they should be nice and snug, and they are. The nut, and it also includes a split washer. That creates some tension there for the engagement. And the other one is identical. And protective of the right ascension indicator window. So now you've got a naked arm That gives you the chance to repolish this. If it's dented and damaged, you can do your refinishing. And I haven't decided for this 50th anniversary whether I'm going to improve it better than factory stock by polishing it like they did in the old days. At the top, there's a very fine, and this is an unusually fine indicator. I predict that thing, if I do any kind of polishing and sanding, is going to go away, and I'm going to have to use a needle file or something to restore it. Everything looks in good condition. If you want to replace inexpensively with a new window, if you've got bad scratches, you can do that. We've got little jeweler's screws that are tapped into the plastic, so you're going to be very careful with retightening. And you can also polish that window if you've got the right kind of plastic polish or a jewelry polish or something like that. You can experiment with the hidden part if you're really uncertain about it. And if you're thoroughly in doubt, you can just get yourself a new one. By the way, the little indicator line you can feel with your thumbnails on the bottom surface. And if that were a new one, I wouldn't be brushing and touching up against that. I'd want to keep it nice and pristine. This bottom surface here directly contacts the top disc of the drive stack in the right ascension drive. And so I'm marveling a little bit here because I've never opened up a scope that's less than 25 years old. This is a 10-year-old, and everything just looks so bright and new, and it's quite striking. So if you saw roughness or gouge or something like that on this surface, you might consider sanding, or I wouldn't polish, but do something to smooth that out so that there'd be no roughness in the engagement. Okay, so we've now revealed the base, and we'll start by cleaning up a little mess here. And here's our stack of discs. These slow motion drives have typically 3 discs. There may be exceptions, but it's big disc, little disc, big disc, so that there's a little gap between the edges of the big disc, and that's the thing that's compressed together to engage. So I'm going to take these off and flip them over in order. I can tell which order it came in. First, I can see on the surface it has these concentric rub marks and a need for cleaning from that smooth bottom rim surface of the turntable. Very tight to the hub. That's not unusual. Okay, then we've got the smaller interior one, and then we have the bottom one, which has its slightly turned up edge due to the effect of the pinion over time. There. There's the bottom surface that shows lots of concentric rub marks, as we expect. And that's because this platter here, as you'll see, is pinned with this roll pin here to the actual gear that's driven. So this is part of the clock drive. And the right ascension ring here is normally engaged to it with friction, so it can slide, but it's normally engaged so that as the clock turns, this platter turns and the ring turns with it, so that your right ascension settings remain good. Then this bottom of this drive disc is in friction contact with the platter, and so as you operate the slow motion control on this, the turntable will move with respect to this drive stack while that drive stack is stuck with friction to the platter and to the drive, and that also preserves your tracking motion. And so only when you're slewing the telescope, when you grab it and just want to turn it on a big angle, does the disc here and its bottom surface rub with respect to the platter. And so that's a level of friction that has to be just right, and that's adjusted when we adjust the nut at the hub of this stack here. And so well, as we reassemble, I'll tell you my tricks for how to know when you've got the right tension. So we'll set those guys aside, and we're not going to go any farther before we take some precautions. With the way that this right ascension ring is kept connected to, but with controlled friction, movable with respect to the platter, is by a couple of tiny little spring-loaded pins. They're going to be at 120 degrees away from this pin point. There are going to be two little pins here that are spring-loaded outwards. This platter has a little bit of a lip or a flange on it, so that flange holds the right ascension ring down. You can't pull it up because it's held down right by the flange. And those pop out and they press against the inner rim of the ring here. If we just take this out, those go flying across the room, and I call the factory with a little bit of embarrassment to tell them I need some more of those things. So I'm going to take a special precaution here before we proceed. Okay, this is a bread bag. I put this whole sucker into the bag for no reason other than to contain anything that goes flying, or at least give me a 90% improved odds of containment. I'm also going to use this when reassembling it because that's even more likely for things to go flying when we're struggling to get things to work. So getting oriented, got pin 120, 120, and I just want to get my fingernails underneath that little flange on this disc. This tends to be really snug, and get that worked loose. There, I felt something snap. Yep, I see a little spring, I see a little pin. It would have gone flying, that one right there. And I'll see if I can't do a better job of containing the other one. We're also disconnecting that little roll pin there. Okay, so now I'm going to reach in and show you this little smaller than a grain of rice piece of plastic and spring. Dangerously, I'll put those on my bench here instead of straight into a bag. And the one on this side has remained in. I've seen these where they're actually all gummed up and stuck in there and need to be pulled out. But we've got a nice fit there, and I'm not sure how well you can see, but this semi-transparent synthetic disc reveals the hole and where that pin is. It springs and moves nicely. So now we're safe to pull this out. So this is the gear, and I'm a little surprised because it's a solid disc instead of being with 6 nice little spokes in the wheel. This lifts right off. There you've got your gear. I think I've seen them like that in modern times. The right ascension ring rides here, and we've got these 4 plastic removable, they're kind of rivet shaped. They've got a head that keeps them from being driven in, that holds them about 1 millimeter up above this surface here, and that's what the ring contacts. So its bottom surface contacts only these, which I see are greased. Frankly, I think anodized aluminum and dry nylon or Delrin is a really good lubricated surface and doesn't need to risk getting stickier and gathering grit. So I'll probably leave that unlubricated. And then the location of the ring is established solely by this inner surface and its engagement with the outer surface of this disc, which is set to the hub. So the outer periphery of the right ascension ring does not contact. There's slight clearance with this rim on the base, And you want to make sure there is. Sometimes somebody will get a ding on their on this, and it'll create a scraping, and you want to fix that ding to make it run smoothly. Also, you typically will find, because there's a little gap there, you'll get grit and dirt here. This is not perfectly clean, but cleaner than usual. But you want to get this nicely cleaned up so you don't get any grit when you turn that manually. So the drive gear engages the motor pinion here, and it's got some weight to it. It doesn't matter what orientation it's in. And there is a Teflon sheet and a second Teflon sheet. I've seen stacks of 3 or 4 of these. There may be more here. They're each about 5 thousandths thick. That may be in part to establish the height of that gear so that it registers with the pinion. Obviously, the gear wants to have a low friction engagement with, and not be rubbing against metal surface here and creating wear with the base. And so these are damp with oil. They are stuck to the surface with a little bit of a film of oil and to that gear. That seems fine if you're rotating once every 24 hours. And it's and the only friction there is when the clock is operating, and only at that speed. When you're slewing the scope, that main gear obviously doesn't turn. But I'm a fan of not having lubrication where you don't absolutely need it. The factory might argue with me, but I will probably put this back, probably with both of these Teflon sheets dry. That's beautiful lubrication. I can tell you, when you have 2 sheets of Teflon adhered together with oil, they're never going to slide with respect to each other. There's going to be sliding at some other surface, and it's going to create more friction for the motor. That's not a problem really, but I would say put it together dry and you'll probably be happy with it, and you don't have to worry about that lubricant failing in decades and getting gummy and making things even worse. So we are done on the top side, and I will prepare for the bottom side tour. I wanted to add something about the engagement of the platter to the main gear with that roll pin there. And that is that roll pin is not particularly strongly connected. It's there just to keep these two rotationally engaged to each other. And so I've had the experience when I'm putting things back together that even if I get the hole nicely aligned, it will push that roll pin down through the gear, and it'll stick out the bottom, and that causes problems. So if you have any problems with that on reassembly, you may want to pull that roll pin and just simply reinsert it from the top surface and get it just down deep enough so that once all the stack is in place and your little flying pins and springs are properly constrained. Also, looking at the top surface of that platter, that's where the bottommost disc of the drive stack slides when slewing. You can see that there's some kind of lubricant there. It's kind of a probably a molybdenum grease or something like that. And that's an area where I might clean that up and not lubricate it, because as that gets gummy, and maybe it's gotten a little gummy, it makes slewing more difficult, and when slewing is difficult, that's a risk for failure of the drive engagement between the pinion and the edges of the discs. And if those start slipping, they start slipping and stay slipping and get worse. So a nice, smooth, consistent slewing, the right amount of friction, but friction that doesn't increase over the years as your lubricant fails, is what you want. And I'm a believer that without that lubricant on top there, we can get the tension just right with the nut and the spring washers in order to get the friction we need, and that basically won't change for decades because there's no lubricant to degrade or be lost.